Welcome to another weekend here on the platform. My name is Sam Omashe. On the program this week, I'll be speaking to Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Dr. Olisa Agbakoba. But before that, my column, Hush Mommy, will be read to you now.
Because many of our boys are growing up without a central male figure.
Many would have preferred her on the hush, but this mummy is too feisty to keep mum. On social media, was it on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, she regained her buzz. She was not oil minister here or a commissioner that fled to the Caribbean. She opted to play moral teacher, a sort of secular priest preaching to the young. She wanted them not to err, not to be corrupt, to focus on the heroic and virtuous life. She did not want them to ape the ways of the Yahoo boys. It was cheery not just to see the beauty back to her elegant ways, but alive and well. But who would not want to hear from dear Zani, Alison Madueke, a former royal minister who turned into something bigger, or shall we say, scarier than oil? The one who did not bore us when she was minister. Her first act was tears. On Ore Road, as works minister, she was like one of us, weeping in public over the crater-infested highway. We did not expect her to translate tears into cheers for fixing the road. What many did not understand was how those who invited her thought she was the right person to play nun only a few years after she was spun out of office. She was, in a sense, canonizing her time in office. She was anointing her generation. She was making herself a heroine of governance. Some, especially in the social media, she was unfair to her host, a group of Ijaw youths. She just came off an administration inundated with corruption charges. She too has a case to answer amounting to billions of dollars. Both Dear Zani and Hush Puppy dramatize two generations. Hush Puppy's is showy, Dear Zani's cocky. But both are not ashamed to advertise themselves. They periscope two failed generations. They tell the tales of three generations that have found warmth in the sty. I saw the generation, mine, born in the 1960s, who had the last set of good education, descend into the corruption of their fathers. Whether as fathers and mothers, they gave the wrong lessons. They encouraged their children to either leave the country with stolen funds to attend schools or bring them back to cradle positions over their Nigerian maids who schooled here. Or when they could not afford them to go abroad, they presided over miracle centers. As CEOs, they ran big firms into the sewer. So the children saw their parents lie, steal and plunder. They defy the rule of law, jail the innocent, kill the just, torpedo the federalist ethos, become ethnic titans, and enshrine the ethic of an oligarchy. The generation also gave us militancy and justified it. They created the environment to hate the other, as we have seen in the flourishing of herdsmen. Of course, Boko Haram. It is the same generation that is giving us the topsy-turvy of the NDDC, where billions of our money is flowing into private pockets, though clinics are absent and fishes die in rivers. The result? The Yahoo boys. I blend the generation of those born in the 1960s with those in the 1950s. If Shoyinka's generation gave us a war, the following generation denied us democracy. The Yahoo boys' generation cemented a graveyard of bad values. Maybe the generation of the Ikorodu boys will yet save this nation. We are seeing that the offspring of the Yahoo boys may be rejecting their parents' values. A barricade of values, an Oedipal rescue. They seem to follow a radical pattern of salvation through industry and creative experimentation. More of such stories are emerging. Maybe rather than the dystopic nightmare of Golding's Lord of the Flies that fictionalized the world of Hitler, Mussolini, and the despair that followed. Maybe we should follow a true story captured by Rutger Bregman about a crop of young people in 1960s lost on an island near Tonga with a pledge never to hurt each other. They did over a year until help came. Maybe they will save a nation adrift.
Welcome to Big Talk. My guest is Senior Advocate of Nigeria, a life bencher of the Body of Benchers, and former President of the Nigeria Bar Association, Dr. Olisa Agbakoba. Thank you for being on this show.
I'm pleased to be here.
We are going to focus on the very contentious issue of Chinese loans. There have been so much drama over the past month on this subject, and it has come straight to the heart of our nationhood and sovereignty. Now, what are the highlights of this matter to you?
Well, I think before I give you the highlights, it's important to set the tone of international relations as to how countries relate to each other. There's a very important treaty that was established in 1608. It's called the Treaty of Westphalia, which is in the west region of Germany. As a result of the 30-year war in Europe, European countries were tired and came together and established relationships, international relationships. The most important concept that was established was the doctrine of sovereignty. All countries are equal, no matter how big in size or small, which is why in the United Nations, apart from the special votes of the 5 permanent members, all members in the General Assembly, whether it's a country that's only 5,000 in population, or like Nigeria with 200, or China with 1 billion, everybody has a vote. That is the essence of equality of nations. And the essence of equality of nations bestows on each country the notion of sovereignty. You cannot interfere in the affairs of one country or the other. But this concept has been completely mixed up in international commercial transactions. In international commercial transactions, people have a right to say, if you default, then so and so will happen. So Nigeria has two caps. Nigeria, as a sovereign nation, can exercise its sovereignty and refuse to go before the jurisdiction of any court. But Nigeria can also waive its immunity, a totally different concept. So the problem here has been mixing immunity and sovereignty as if they are one. So what immunity is the equivalent of Section 308 of our Constitution, where, for instance, a governor can say, you know what, since you're accusing me of a crime, I hereby waive my immunity to go to court. That does not mean that his sovereign status is removed. So yes, China has given us loans, and as any good creditor, they will want to be paid. And they wouldn't want Nigeria to invoke, a sovereign status if there's a default. So they insisted on two conditions for the loans. First, that Nigeria must submit to the jurisdiction of civil courts. Second, that if Nigeria defaults in respect of any of the loans contracted and given to Nigeria, then China will be able to recover the assets for which the loans have been purchased. So unfortunately, in the newspapers, the entire thing got mixed up. Sovereignty on the one hand and immunity. But I think that the problem also is that the government hasn't done very well in organizing the policy. Because under the DMO legislation, that is the Debt Management Office, and under the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the process of taking a loan goes this way. First, it is generated by the Ministry of Finance. It is sent to the Attorney General's office, where it goes to the Bilateral Investment Treaties Division. It is cleaned out, and then the president submits a copy of the loan agreement to the National Assembly for approval. So I think what then blew up the entire issue is the fact that the National Assembly was not consulted. And I think on that ground, the National Assembly got a very good point. They ought to have been consulted before the loans were taken. But it is standard international clause for a loan agreement to carry in it the issue of immunity, waiver of immunity. So there's absolutely nothing wrong that Nigeria has done, except that it failed to consult the National Assembly.
Well, there are people who ask the question that to the extent that you lose your immunity, your sovereignty is compromised. Because
no,
your sovereignty is also a very strong part of who you are. Sovereignty is the fact that you have a nation, as you refer to the Treaty of Westphalia, which itself guarantees that a nation stands on its own on equal terms. Although that is only a matter of theory, because we know that in practice, yes. All nations are not created equal. But then we also saw that if I concede anything that I call an immunity, to the extent that I concede immunity and give away part of what I treasure, something of my sovereignty is lost.
No. You're just in a commercial transaction. This principle is so old. In 1973, Lord Denning, one of the greatest judges in the United Kingdom, denied Nigeria when Nigeria pleaded sovereign immunity. Nigeria Airways had been arrested, carrying cargo. So then he said, if Nigeria Airways was carrying the president, then there will be sovereign immunity. But if Nigeria was treating her as a commercial person, then there will be no immunity. Nigeria is taking a loan as a commercial person. But also don't forget that only last week, the DMO issued sovereign bonds. If you buy a treasury bill, say of 100 million naira, the only confidence I have in buying the bill is that the government of Nigeria is guaranteeing it. In other words, the government of Nigeria is waiving its immunity. So it even applies domestically, that if I do not pay you, you can go against my assets. So there's absolutely nothing wrong in waiving immunity in commercial transactions, locally and internationally. It's the only way a creditor can have some satisfaction that it will be paid. So I think the problem is, as I said, mixing the notion of sovereignty and the notion of immunity. The fact, okay, just for example, assuming that China were to seize the international airport in Abuja, it doesn't affect our sovereignty. It's just an asset. And Nigeria has entered a commercial transaction in which it pledged the international airport for a loan. And if that loan is defaulted, then China is entitled, as indeed would be any other creditor, to go against it. It's so simple. If you take a loan, you must pay. And if you want to take the loan and the creditor attaches a condition, then you're bound by that condition. And it has nothing to do with your sovereignty. The Chinese are not going to become Nigerian president or take over the National Assembly. They will only seize the assets for which you as a nation pledged to pay back the loan for which the assets are compromised. So I don't see anything wrong in international trade relations. That it's so common. Everybody does it. The Americans do it, America and China, European Union and African countries. So I think the hula baloo here is the usual misunderstanding by people. There's such a misconception about the notion of government. They do things secretly. Everything is full of corruption. And therefore, when this story blew, after all, this is not new. Nigeria took this loan, I think, as far back as 2015. Yeah. And another, they've taken different loans. I'm not quite sure which is what year, but it's a long time ago. But suddenly it blew up in the papers, and everybody went, as usual, there's bedlam everywhere. The only point that I think is valid, the National Assembly ought to have been consulted under the Debt Management Office legislation and the Fiscal Responsibility legislation. Other than that, everything is perfect. And I think the key point is to then ask, what are these loans being used for? I think that's what is important to me. Are they being properly utilized? Okay, we've taken the loan. Nigeria cannot go back now and resile from the loan. So are the loans being properly utilized to build the roads that they were taking for the airport in Abuja and Lagos, and the power infrastructure, the rail infrastructure? Those are the kinds of things that I think we ought to concentrate.
Well, let me give two examples with regard to the United States. There's this major hotel in the United States, the Waldorf Astoria in New York, where
Yes.
the U.S. presidents usually stay when they visit when they visit New York.
Yes.
It was bought over by the Chinese, and the United States said, no more. The president of the U.S., especially that was during Obama's tenure, that the president of the U.S. will no longer stay in that hotel for security reasons, because the Chinese now own it. Now, the other incident goes back to the origin of the internet. And that was because the United States saw that to communicate between one end of the United States and the other, usually, especially for its military, was usually through train. And they believed that if the trains were one way or the other obstructed in case of a military situation, it means that the American military will be cut off from itself. So that was why the internet, that was how the internet was born, as a child of necessity for security purpose. So let's look, for instance, that we have a train station, a train from Lagos to Kano that is being constructed under the loan. And then, God forbid, we are not able to adhere, or we are not faithful to the terms of that contract, and the Chinese take over this train from Lagos to Kano, which has become, and we expect it to be, when it eventually fructifies, a major artery in Nigerian communication, and the Chinese take it over. We might be talking about sovereignty in the abstract, but in actual sense, if the Chinese take over that, they took over our country. Or Mambila Plateau, where we are taking loans. And we don't pay our loans. And the power, so crucial to 21st century existence, is taken over by China. Where is sovereignty in all of this?
I agree with you entirely. That's why we should make sure we don't default. I agree entirely. But here we're talking about two different things now. You moved the subject to national security, and the two examples you gave of Waldorf Astoria and the internet is more national security. So the question would be, in taking a loan, many considerations will come in. Your national pride, the questions of national security, the questions of repayability. And I would assume that the Attorney General, the Minister of Finance, National Security Advisor would have been brought into the loop and requested to advise the government as to whether this made sense. If they didn't do that, then that's lack of due diligence. So I will have to assume, without knowing what went on, that this was all done. And the consequence of taking a loan for such a strategic project as you referred to, say from Lagos to Abuja, suppose there's a rail network that carries over 6 to 10 million people every week. When the government understand that they need to put aside the money to pay for it. Having said that, let me also point out that this Chinese-Nigeria thing is hogwash. Nigeria has taken about up to about $300 billion. The portion of the Chinese loan is very small. What about other countries? Why aren't we talking about the UK that has the same clause? Why aren't we talking about the Americans? I think there's something that, for me personally, there's a stigmatization of China. It's not their fault that they want to overtake America as the world's, great superpower in economic affairs. You can see how President Trump is hitting back at China. Chinese have their national interests, and it's for them to expand. They are building the Silk Road through Pakistan, it will come into Mombasa, and they are clear about their, international trade policy. So the lesson for Nigeria is, well, if we don't want loans, have we interrogated ourselves locally to see whether we can raise money? I've always questioned, as an international development, law expert, that do we really need these loans? So, but we're moving from this issue about the standard clause agreement and sovereignty. I think that if Nigeria were to look inwards, we could raise a lot of money. I gave an example in a letter I wrote to the Attorney General. There is the East-West Road. It needs 100 billion. But there is this Federal Secretariat that can sell for 120 billion. It's been empty for 20 years. So what's wrong with us? We've got the possibility of saying, what exactly is our public sector borrowing requirements? If we determine what they are, can't we raise the funds locally rather than go to the Chinese? Commercially, it's a good deal. What may not be a good deal is exactly what you point out. Is our sovereignty, and the way you really sound suggests is our national pride. It's our national pride. If I were to give you a loan, or you were to give me a loan, and then the one I can't pay, then you come with police to take my car, and my kids are in the car, and they are forced out.
Yes.
That touches my pride, but not the commercial wisdom in the Chinese giving loans, and the commercial wisdom in Nigeria taking the loan. So long as they invest the money properly and they set aside monies to repay, Nigeria owes more domestically than internationally. And in the history of Nigeria, there's never been a default where Nigeria also waives its own immunity. If I were to buy 100, as I said earlier, 100 million naira worth of treasury bills, if Nigeria defaults, I'll take them to court, and they can't come and say sovereign immunity. So commercial transactions require fluidity, and I don't want you to take money from me and then come back and tell me you won't pay because you're sovereign.
Now, there are two issues here, and let us first hit the issue of the proportion of the loans from China. And the issue is not whether it is a lot of money or whether it is not. Of course, a lot of money, even if it is a fraction of all the loans we have taken over the years. The question is that the repercussions, historically, of defaulting in a Chinese loan is different from the repercussions that we have seen over the decades. And Western loans, the West will not threaten you as the Chinese have done in some places. They've taken the radio stations. They've taken whole downtowns in the south, in eastern countries. So their own is that, no, you are owing me. You're owing me. You have to pay. You cannot act like Unoka in this wall apart and put there on the list that, look, China is owing me. Britain is I'm owing Britain. I'm owing China will say no. It will act like the other man who will come and defecate on your floor. So that is one of the differences.
I agree entirely. But we went there. They didn't force us.
Of course.
So you can. You're back to my point. We should blame ourselves. Are you blaming the Chinese for giving us the money? Why did we take it? And as I said, why can't we? Maybe the lesson coming out of all this is that we ought not to take loans without thinking through it carefully. And I think that is why the Debt Management Office legislation and the fiscal responsibility legislation required the approval of the National Assembly, because they act more on behalf of the people. So many of these issues you are raising would have been raised there. What about this issue of national pride, sovereignty, and all that? Unfortunately, that wasn't done, and I think it's wrong. And I agree with you that the Chinese are extremely aggressive, and that is not right. You are absolutely right. Why would they, as they've done in Zambia and Mombasa, seize assets? It's not nice. They can roll over. The Western countries understand how to roll over to maintain relations, but the Chinese seem to be very aggressive. But I'm not going to blame them for being very aggressive, even though I don't like what they're doing. Even in Nigeria here, you see where they bring in laborers. they bring in carpenters, they bring in masons. So they have a different style from that of the West, and that must be condemned. But as I said, to return to the main point, they didn't ask us to take the loan if we didn't want. So really, the real question here is, what are our development plans? How do we intend to finance our infrastructure deficit, which is about $30 trillion? Where do we find the money? Those are the answers that we have to look for. If we can't do it domestically, we must go abroad. Will we shame ourselves by signing a loan agreement with the Chinese where they can seize our assets and raise the question of sovereignty, even though it is not, it's more immunity? So these are the broad questions that I think lessons will be drawn from, this issue.
On PhotoSpeak, the triumvirate of Nigerian letters did not always agree, but on the pardon for General Mamman Vatsa, Nigeria's soldier poet, they were at one to appeal to IBB. A futile effort, but at least they tried. Just before the program ends, this is my poem in honor of Leah Sharibu. Leah, days ago, deaths at dawn, not far from you. Father, grandfather, family gone by goons, fiery with fear, in farm and homestead. Hate also ate them up to fat blood through machetes for daring to say amen to a God, or sigh to a past, or accept an accent that made them quiver. Thank you for watching the program today. You can catch up with my published column on www.samomashe.com. Also follow me on Twitter. My handle is @SamOmashe. And until next time, be good.